My name is Diana, 34 years old. To my husband, Victor, I was just a quiet woman who lived off a modest trust fund, while he believed he was a financial prodigy who single-handedly secured millions from an anonymous venture capital fund in New York. Flush with his newfound success, Victor demanded a divorce on our anniversary, stating he was marrying a high-society heiress to elevate his corporate standing. He threw a basic settlement check at me, saying, "You're a small-town girl, Diana. You don't belong in Wall Street." I calmly signed the papers and moved my things. He smiled a victorious smirk, completely unaware that the anonymous venture capital fund that provided 90% of his company's operational cash flow was owned entirely by me under my family's private estate. The moment the divorce was finalized, I pulled my fund's capital out of his company, triggering an immediate margin call that bankrupted his business before his new wedding even began. The private dining room at Le Bernardin in Manhattan was illuminated by the soft, amber glow of a minimalist crystal chandelier. Outside, the rain slicked the black asphalt of the city streets, reflecting the neon theater lights of Broadway. Inside, the atmosphere was thick, with the scent of expensive truffles, vintage Bordeaux, and a chilling, unspoken detachment. Diana sat across from her husband, Victor, her fingers tracing the edge of her porcelain water glass. Today was their 5th wedding anniversary, but there were no flowers on the table, no shared smiles, and no nostalgic recollections of the lean years when they lived in a cramped, drafty studio apartment in Queens. Victor looked immaculate. He wore a custom midnight blue Brioni suit, his hair swept back perfectly, his wrist bearing a platinum Patek Philippe watch that cost more than their first 3 years of rent combined. To the financial press of Wall Street, Victor was the tech sector's newest golden boy, a brilliant financial prodigy who had single-handedly kept his artificial intelligence logistics startup, Nexus Tech, afloat by securing a $50 million capital injection from a highly secretive, elite venture capital fund called Horizon Alpha. Over the past year, Victor's face had graced the covers of prominent business magazines, praised for his uncanny ability to attract old money investments without surrendering operational control. But as Victor looked across the table at Diana, his eyes held none of the warmth that a husband should possess on an anniversary. Instead, his gaze was clinical, analytical, and entirely transactional. "You're remarkably quiet tonight, Diana," Victor said, his baritone voice lacking any genuine emotion as he set his wine glass down with a soft click. "Though, I suppose that's nothing new. You've always preferred the background." Diana gave a small, quiet nod, her face remaining perfectly calm. At 34, she wore a simple, unbranded charcoal silk dress, her dark hair pulled back into an elegant, neat twist. To Victor, his mother, and their entire new circle of wealthy tech entrepreneurs, Diana was just a plain, unpretentious woman who lived a small, inconsequential life supported by a modest, low-yield family trust fund. She didn't mingle with the elite Manhattan socialites, she didn't attend the high-profile charity galas, and she spent her days managing the quiet logistics of their duplex penthouse. Victor truly believed he had outgrown her. He believed that his fierce intellect and business acumen had elevated him to a higher social stratum, leaving his small-town wife far behind in the dust of his success. What Victor's blinding, narcissistic arrogance completely prevented him from seeing was that Nexus Tech hadn't survived on his genius. A year ago, his company was weeks away from absolute bankruptcy, rejected by every mainstream venture capital firm on the East Coast due to his terrible management skills. The $50 million lifeline from Horizon Alpha didn't arrive because an anonymous billionaire happened to admire Victor's pitch deck. It arrived because Diana had quietly instructed her family's private multi-billion-dollar asset management firm, Vance Global Holdings, to create a secure, completely anonymous shell fund to protect her husband's dream. Diana was the sole architect and ultimate benefactor behind Horizon Alpha, She had used her immense, inherited old money wealth to secretly buy up 90% of his company's operational cash flow, shielding him from ruin while allowing him to maintain the illusion that he was a self-made titan. She had hidden her true capacity because she loved him and because she wanted him to feel the genuine pride of success without the crushing weight of knowing his wife had bought his throne for him. But success had turned Victor into a monster. Lately, the whispers in the tech community had reached Diana's desk. Victor had been spending his weekends in the Hamptons with Camille Sterling, the highly visible, glamorous heiress to a prominent New York banking dynasty. Victor's mother, Evelyn, had even stopped by the penthouse earlier that week, casually remarking that a global tech corporation needed a modern, high-society co-founder to solidify its institutional partnerships rather than a quiet, simple girl who added nothing to the brand's public aesthetic. Diana had listened to her mother-in-law with an unshakable, silent composure. She knew Victor was scheduled to sign the final, multi-billion-dollar valuation merger with Sterling Financial Group by the end of the month. What Victor completely failed to realize in his desperate rush to climb the high society ladder was that the core operational capital keeping his servers running, his engineers paid, and his credit lines open was entirely contingent on a private, revocable funding mandate held exclusively under her maiden name. As the waiter cleared their main course, Victor didn't reach for a gift or a card. Instead, he unzipped his sleek leather briefcase, pulled out a crisp white legal folder, and slid it smoothly across the table over the pristine white tablecloth until it rested exactly in front of Diana's plate. "I think it's best if we skip the pleasantries, Diana," Victor said, his voice entirely devoid of remorse as he leaned back in his leather chair. "The lawyers have already finalized the asset separation. Our marriage is over." Diana did not flinch. She looked down at the crisp, white folder resting against the porcelain edge of her plate, then raised her calm, dark eyes to meet Victor's. "A divorce, Victor? Tonight, on our anniversary?" "Let's not be sentimental, Diana. It doesn't suit either of us," Victor said, his tone dry and dismissive as he tapped his platinum watch. "The reality is quite simple. Nexus Tech has just crossed a $500 million valuation. Next week, I am formalizing a massive corporate alliance with the Sterling Financial Group, and next month, I am moving into their executive circles. To put it bluntly, you are a small-town girl with a small-town mindset. You don't belong on Wall Street, and you certainly don't fit into the high-profile lifestyle my future demands." From the shadows near the entrance of the private dining room, Victor's mother, Evelyn, stepped forward. She had been waiting out of sight, ensuring her son didn't back down. Dressed in heavy diamonds and a sharp designer suit, she looked at Diana with cold, elitist disdain. "What my son is trying to tell you, Diana, is that a modern tech empire requires a modern, influential partnership," Evelyn scoffed, resting her hands on the back of Victor's chair. "Camille Sterling can open doors in London, Tokyo, and Zurich. You, on the other hand, spend your days hiding in the penthouse managing a domestic grocery list. You are a financial dead weight. You brought nothing into this marriage, and according to the prenuptial agreement Richard Vance drafted for us, you will leave with exactly nothing." Victor pushed a sleek Montblanc pen across the table until it clicked against the folder. "I've instructed my legal team to provide a one-time settlement check of $50,000 out of sheer courtesy. Sign the waiver, vacate the penthouse by tomorrow morning, and let's close this chapter cleanly. Don't embarrass yourself by trying to fight our lawyers in court." They both watched her, waiting for the inevitable breakdown. Evelyn expected tears. Victor expected a desperate plea, reminders of the early years, or a frantic negotiation for a higher payout. They wanted the satisfaction of watching the quiet girl from the provinces shatter under the weight of their immense wealth. Instead, Diana reached out, picked up the Montblanc pen, and opened the folder, Without reading a single clause, she turned directly to the final execution page. Her hand was perfectly steady as she signed her name across the line in elegant, flowing script. Diana Vance. She capped the pen with a sharp, definitive click and placed it precisely on top of the document. There, it is signed. You have your clean break, Victor. Victor blinked, a flash of genuine irritation crossing his face. The complete lack of resistance robbed him of the powerful victory he had rehearsed in his mind. You're not going to argue? You're just signing it? I don't waste time arguing over dead assets, Victor, Diana said smoothly, picking up her simple clutch purse and standing up from the table. She looked down at her husband and mother-in-law, her face radiating an unshakable, royal composure. Enjoy your alliance with the Sterlings. I hope their capital is as ironclad as you think it is. It is, Victor snapped, his arrogance rushing back to shield his bruised ego. By tomorrow afternoon, the Sterling merger will be public, and Nexus Tech will be completely untouchable, a reality you could never comprehend from the safety of your modest little trust fund. Goodbye, Victor, Diana said softly. She turned and walked out of the private dining room, her footsteps rhythmic and calm against the polished hardwood. The moment she stepped into the pouring rain outside Le Bernardin, her personal driver opened a door to a sleek, unmarked luxury sedan. Diana climbed into the warm leather interior, pulled her encrypted satellite phone from her purse, and dialed a direct, secure line to the trading floor of Vance Global Holdings. The call picked up on the first ring. Good evening, Miss Vance. We have the execution decree on our screens. How do you wish to proceed with the Horizon Alpha portfolio? Diana leaned back against the headrest, her eyes reflecting the cold neon lights of Manhattan washing over the glass windows. The domestic disguise she had worn for 5 years was officially gone, replaced by the razor-sharp mind of the city's most powerful hidden billionaire. Victor truly believes his genius saved Nexus Tech, Diana said, her voice dropping into a register of chilling authority. He has completely forgotten that Horizon Alpha owns 90% of his operational cash flow under a revocable funding mandate. He wanted me out of his infrastructure, so let's give him exactly what he asked for. Understood, Miss Vance. Shall we initiate the capital freeze? Pull the entire $50 million liquidity injection out of their master account immediately, Diana commanded coldly. Trigger the immediate margin call on all outstanding corporate lines of credit, and notify the Sterling Financial Group that their primary tech partner is officially default rated. Let's see how high Victor can climb when I remove the floor beneath his feet. The grand ballroom of the Pierre Hotel on Fifth Avenue was a sea of black tuxedos and glittering diamond necklaces. Less than 12 hours after the quiet signing at Le Bernardin, Victor had thrown the ultimate victory celebration. Giant digital ice sculptures carved into the shape of the Nexus Tech logo stood at the center of the room, slowly melting under the heat of 100 studio lights. Wall Street analysts, tech journalists, and high-profile venture capitalists crowded the floor, their eyes fixed on the massive digital ticker display that announced the impending merger between Nexus Tech and the Sterling Financial Group. Victor stood near the velvet-roped VIP lounge, a crystal flute of vintage champagne in his hand. He was completely intoxicated by his own success. The morning papers had already run his profile on the front page of the financial section, the new king of AI logistics. Evelyn stood by his side, her neck heavily draped in new emeralds, her laughter echoing loudly above the classical string quartet playing in the corner. Look at them, Victor, she whispered, gesturing to a group of billionaire hedge fund managers waiting in line just to shake his hand. They are bowing to you, and to think, just yesterday, that simple, plain girl thought she had a right to sit at our table. Camille is already on her way with the network executives. This is the dynasty we were born to build. Victor adjusted his silk bow tie, a proud, cold smile fixed on his face. Vivian was a safety net mother, but a real tiger doesn't stay in a cage. Horizon Alpha's $50 million gave me the leverage I needed, and now that the Sterling Group is injecting another $80 million, Nexus Tech will control the entire East Coast supply chain interface by next quarter. Camille Sterling walked through the double doors, looking radiant in a white haute couture gown that flashed under the cameras. She slipped her arm through Victor's, kissing his cheek with a practiced, media-ready affection. "The signing ceremony table is ready in the private salon, Victor," she said, her voice dripping with the confidence of old Manhattan money. "My father's corporate attorneys have already reviewed your Horizon Alpha funding certificates. They are completely satisfied your cash flow is ironclad. Once you click the digital transfer on the master ledger, our banking network will authorize the merger wire." "Perfect," Victor said, his chest swelling with absolute pride. "Let's go inside and finalize history." As they turned toward the private salon, Victor's phone vibrated aggressively in his tuxedo pocket. He pulled it out, his brow furrowing as he saw the caller ID. It was Mark, his chief financial officer, back at the Nexus headquarters. Victor instantly pressed the decline button, shoving the phone back into his pocket. He wasn't going to let a frantic engineer or a minor operational question interrupt his coronation. He didn't check his priority email network. He didn't see the formal, military-grade liquidity clawback directive that had reached his corporate bank's clearing desk at exactly 1 a.m. He truly believed Diana was a powerless housewife sitting in a cheap motel room, completely oblivious to the fact that the clock on the automated margin call she had triggered was down to its final 60 seconds. While Victor stood beneath the brilliant chandeliers of the Fifth Avenue Gala, enjoying the adulation of Manhattan's elite, Diana sat in the quiet, glass-walled conference room of Vance Global Holdings on the 80th floor of One World Trade Center. The room was stark, cool, and silent, illuminated only by the massive digital trading monitors that displayed the global financial markets. Outside, the night sky over the harbor was dark, the city lights cutting through the lingering rain clouds. Diana's fingers rested lightly on the edge of her sleek glass desk. On her left monitor, a live stream of the Pierre Hotel Gala played silently, showing Victor smiling widely, holding Camille Sterling's hand as they walked toward the signing table, surrounded by flashbulbs and applause. He looked completely invincible. On her right monitor, a completely different reality was unfolding in real time. It was the secure liquidity interface for Horizon Alpha. A single, pulsing crimson confirmation box displayed the successful execution of the capital extraction protocol. Victor and his legal team had completely ignored the standard formal notification sent to their corporate registered agent at dawn, arrogance blinding them into believing a quiet, discarded wife could never possess the power to threaten their empire. They had severely miscalculated. Diana didn't need to drag Victor through public divorce courts or beg for a share of his company. She owned the capital that kept his company alive. "You really should have tracked the source of your funding, Victor," Diana murmured, her voice calm and completely steady. When Diana originally established the hidden credit lines for Nexus Tech through Horizon Alpha, she didn't just hand over $50 million. She wired it through a strict, short-term liquidity facility. She knew Victor's fatal flaw was his vanity. He was so eager to brag about his multi-million-dollar valuation that he never bothered to look closely at the underlying financial covenants. Because of this, she had quietly embedded an absolute, immediate clawback clause tied directly to the marital status of the ultimate fund controller. The moment Victor signed the asset waiver legally separating himself from the Vance estate, he automatically triggered a massive operational default. Diana moved her hand to her master keyboard, typing a final, 6-digit authorization code into the Vance Global Vault. She did not hesitate. She pressed the execute key. Instantly, the scrolling lines of blue data on her screen ceased, replaced by a cold, clinical string of text that blinked in a slow, rhythmic pattern. Liquidity facility extracted. $50 million recalled. Margin call initiated to clearing banks. Diana leaned back in her chair, picking up her glass of mineral water. She took a slow, deliberate sip, her expression perfectly serene, and turned her focus entirely back to the live video feed of the valuation ceremony on her left monitor. The financial floor had been pulled out from a dark room in Lower Manhattan, and the devastating ripple effect was traveling straight uptown at the speed of light, headed directly for the grand signing room of the Pierre Hotel. Inside the private signing salon of the Pierre Hotel, Victor stood at the head of the polished glass table, a heavy gold fountain pen hovering exactly an inch above the multi-million-dollar merger agreement. He looked directly at the patriarch of the Sterling Financial Group, flashing his most charismatic, media-trained smile. "Ladies and gentlemen, when you invest in Nexus Tech, you aren't just funding software. You are securing the future of global logistics. This alliance is the crown jewel of my career." The board members and banking executives nodded in deep admiration, their own pens ready to sign the counterpart funding documents. Evelyn stood near the velvet drapes, her diamond bracelets clinking softly as she sipped champagne, her face radiating the smug victory of a matriarch who had successfully secured her family's dynasty. Camille stood right beside Victor, her eyes shining with corporate ambition as she cued the digital presentation screen to display the real-time balance sheet of Nexus Tech to the investors. "And now," Victor announced, his voice booming with absolute authority, "let's authorize the master account transfer that finalizes our union. Camille, initialize the ledger link." Camille pressed the validation button on her tablet. She expected the massive wall display to instantly flash green, confirming the pristine $50 million liquidity cushion that anchored Victor's company. Instead, the screen froze. The digital interface flickered violently once, twice, and then vanished into a pitch-black screen. A sudden, piercing error tone echoed through the high-end sound system of the salon. The sleek presentation graphics disappeared, replaced by a cold, clinical string of bright red text that began to blink in a slow, terrifying rhythm. Critical margin error, transactions halted, account deficit detected, core funds extracted by primary creditor. A sharp, confused murmur instantly rippled through the panel of banking executives. The warm smiles on the faces of the Sterling board members vanished, replaced by narrowed eyes and immediate, defensive posture. Victor's breath caught sharply in his throat. His finger mashed the tablet screen repeatedly, but the black display remained stubbornly locked. Just a minor server synchronization delay with our clearing house," Victor stammered into the room, a forced, hollow laugh escaping his lips as a sudden wave of cold sweat broke out across his forehead. "Give our financial team 10 seconds to verify the pipeline." He stepped away from the table, his face turning a deep, angry red as he frantically gestured to his CFO, Mark, who had just burst through the double doors of the salon. Mark's face was completely pale, his hands shaking as he held a printed financial statement. Victor grabbed him by the lapels, his voice a furious whisper. "Mark, what the hell is going on with the server stream? The Sterling board is sitting right inside that room." "Victor, it's an absolute wipeout," Mark shouted through a whisper, his voice completely hysterical and cracking under immense panic. "The banks didn't glitch. Our servers are perfectly fine. But the entire $50 million liquidity injection from Horizon, Alpha, the money that was backing our entire valuation, has been pulled out of our master account. Every single corporate credit line has just been auto-frozen." "That's impossible," Victor hissed, his grip tightening. Horizon Alpha signed a 5-year capital commitment. They can't just recall $50 million without a lawsuit. They didn't need to sue. Mark groaned, trembling as he pointed to the legal clause on his tablet. Horizon Alpha's funding was tied to a private marital status covenant under their parent holding company, Vance Global. Victor, the moment you finalized that divorce asset waiver yesterday morning, you legally detached yourself from the fund's controller. They triggered the immediate clawback clause at 8:00 a.m. We're in default, Victor. We don't have enough cash to cover tomorrow's operational payroll. Victor stared at the wall, his mind spinning into absolute chaos as the name registered with devastating clarity. Vance Global Holdings. Diana. Before he could even breathe, a sudden chime echoed from his phone. A text message from an unverified, encrypted number flashed on the glass screen. Enjoy your empty vault, Victor. It's the last time you'll ever buy a legacy with money that doesn't belong to you. See you in the restructuring room tomorrow morning. Victor's hand lost all its strength, the phone slipping from his fingers and clattering loudly against the marble floor. He looked through the glass doors of the salon, where the sterling executives were already standing up, their assistants frantically packing up their leather folders as news of Nexus Tech's sudden margin call began to trend across Wall Street blogs. Evelyn was rushing toward him, her face twisted in absolute horror. The brilliant financial empire he had built on a hidden cushion of old money was disintegrating in real time, and Victor was standing completely exposed in the middle of the wreckage. The conference room on the 42nd floor of the Manhattan Restructuring Center was suffocatingly cold. Outside, the morning fog hung low over the East River, obscuring the city skyline in a dense blanket of gray. Inside, Victor sat on the left side of the long glass table, flanked by his mother, Evelyn, and his senior corporate attorney, Richard Vance. Victor looked completely unrecognizable from the man who had stood beneath the chandeliers of the Pierre Hotel just 24 hours prior. His custom Brioni suit was wrinkled, his tie was loose, and his bloodshot eyes stared blankly at the tabletop. Following the catastrophic margin call, Nexus Tech's valuation had completely cratered, crashing by over 80% before the opening bell. The Sterling Financial Group hadn't just walked away from the merger, they had filed a formal misrepresentation claim to recover their initial due diligence capital. Yet, despite the smoke rising from his destroyed career, Victor forced a desperate, defensive glare onto his face as the heavy glass doors at the back of the room swung open. Diana walked in. She wore an immaculate, charcoal grey tailored suit that radiated an unshakable, quiet authority. Her dark hair was styled into a sharp, professional bob, and her expression was entirely calm, completely devoid of the domestic simplicity that had defined her for 5 years. Behind her walked Marcus Vance, the most feared white-collar litigator on Wall Street, carrying a slim leather folder. Victor's lawyer, Richard Vance, looked up from his notes. His eyes instantly narrowed, his posture stiffening in sudden, deep unease as he recognized the powerhouse attorney representing the housewife. Richard stood up slowly, clearing his throat. "Marcus, what is the meaning of this?" "This is a private, low-level corporate debt resolution meeting. You don't handle standard startup restructurings." "I don't," Marcus said smoothly, taking a seat next to Diana and opening his leather folder with precise, measured movements. "But I do represent Vance Global Holdings, which happens to be the parent institution of Horizon Alpha and the primary institutional creditor of Nexus Tech. We are here today to finalize the absolute asset liquidation and enforce the terms of the default." Victor let out a sharp, bitter laugh, leaning forward over the table. He desperately needed to reclaim his sense of control. "Let's stop the theatrics, Diana. I don't know what kind of legal loophole you used to freeze the Horizon Alpha account, but my financial team is already working to secure secondary venture backing. It's only a matter of time before we replace your capital. Your $50,000 settlement check is right here. Take your money, walk away, and let's end this circus permanently." Diana didn't even glance at the check. She looked directly into Victor's eyes, her gaze entirely cold. "The papers are already signed, Victor. I signed them at Le Bernardin. Today is simply about enforcing the exact terms that you and your mother insisted upon." The restructuring referee presiding over the case entered the room, calling the session to order with a sharp tap of his pen. Before this panel authorizes an extension of emergency credit, the law requires the debtor's counsel to read aloud the finalized liquidity covenants, specifically taking into account the verified ownership of Horizon Alpha's funding source. Richard Vance pulled the final document package toward him. He adjusted his glasses, completely confident that the original prenuptial agreement he had drafted would protect Victor's company and leave Diana with nothing. He flipped to the addendum pages, his mouth opening to speak. "Your Honor, according to the standard prenuptial terms executed by both parties, all corporate equity, intellectual property, and operational assets under the name Victor Pendleton remain strictly." Suddenly, the words caught violently in his throat. Richard's eyes widened behind his lenses, scanning the fine print of the capital registration documents attached to the file. The color drained from his face, so quickly it looked as if he had stopped breathing. His hands began to tremble, the thick parchment paper rattling loudly against the surface of the glass table. "Richard?" Evelyn frowned, her sharp voice cutting through the room with intense impatience. "What is wrong with you? Read the clause. Remind her that she leaves with nothing." I can't," Richard whispered, a bead of cold sweat dripping down his temple. "Read it, counselor," the referee commanded, his voice echoing authoritatively in the silent room. Richard swallowed hard, his voice cracking under the weight of the text. Appendix G, Section 4. In the event of an asset waiver initiated by the founder, Victor Pendleton, the hidden institutional credit facility is hereby fully audited. The capital provided by Horizon Alpha is held entirely by Vance Global Holdings. Furthermore, he stopped, looking up at Victor with pure horror. "Keep reading," Victor shouted, slamming his hand onto the table, an icy wave of panic violently seizing his chest. Furthermore, since the operational cash flow was utilized under a provisional marital safety covenant, the termination of said covenant triggers an immediate acceleration of all outstanding debts. 100% of the digital infrastructure, proprietary algorithms, and current commercial assets of Nexus Tech are hereby seized immediately by the primary creditor, Diana Vance, to satisfy the $50 million default liability. The founder walks away with zero equity. The restructuring room erupted into absolute chaos. "No, that's a lie. She's a nobody. She was just living off a cheap trust fund." Victor chung up, lunging across the glass table toward his ex-wife, his face contorted in rage, only for two burly security officers to instantly step forward and pin him firmly back into his chair. Evelyn's manicured hand flew to her throat, her face twisting in silent, paralyzed shock as she stared at the woman she had dismissed as a financial dead weight. Diana slowly stood up from her chair, looking down at the panicked, broken man who had tried to discard her in the dark. "You told me to read the prenup word for word, Victor," Diana said, her voice dropping into a register of absolute victory that silenced the room. "You should have checked who actually owned the vault before you decided to call me a small-town girl." The fallout from the restructuring room was instantaneous and unmerciful. By 2:00 p.m. that afternoon, the news had completely shattered the financial world. Wall Street blogs, tech journalists, and digital ticker boards across Lower Manhattan flashed the exact same breaking headline: "The Nexus Tech empire collapses. Tech prodigy ousted as hidden billionaire heiress reclaims core capital. Victor stood in the lobby of Nexus Tech's grand headquarters on Hudson Street, staring blankly at the two armed security guards who blocked his path to the private executive elevators. In his hands, he held a flimsy cardboard box filled with his personal desk items, a gold-plated pen set, a few framed photos of his luxury vacations, and a stack of revoked corporate credentials. His executive security badge had been cleanly snapped in half at the front reception desk. "You can't do this," Victor yelled, his voice cracking with desperation as he glared at the building's supervisor. "I am the founder. I am Victor Pendleton. I built this company from the ground up. I am the brain behind the AI." "Not anymore, Mr. Pendleton," the supervisor replied coldly, his tone entirely devoid of the sycophantic warmth Victor had grown accustomed to over the past year. "We received an official corporate directive from Vance Global Holdings on behalf of the new majority asset owner. Your access to the laboratory floors, the server rooms, and the financial databases has been permanently terminated. You have 24 hours to vacate the corporate leased penthouse as well, as it is an asset under the fund's umbrella." Before Victor could process the massive blow, his phone vibrated violently in his pocket. It was the managing director from the Sterling Financial Group calling from their Fifth Avenue office. Victor answered frantically, pressing the phone to his ear with a shaking hand. "Hello. Hello, listen to me. The lawyers are sorting out the server anomaly right now." "Save your breath, Victor." The director's voice cut through the line, cold, transactional, and absolute. "The multi-billion-dollar merger is officially dead. Our compliance team just finished reviewing the audited ownership filings from the New York Restructuring Court. Sterling Financial will not allow its capital, its reputation, or its brand to be associated with a man who has been legally exposed for corporate misrepresentation and stripped of his own operational funding overnight." "What about Camille?" Victor stammered, looking around the bustling lobby as tech workers began to whisper and point at him from the elevators. "Camille knows that I am the face of this." "Camille is currently finalizing her calendar to meet with the new management of the logistics infrastructure," the director interrupted ruthlessly. "Don't contact her again. You're a financial liability, Victor, and on Wall Street, we liquidate liabilities." The line went dead with a sharp, definitive click. Victor slowly lowered the phone, his hands shaking so violently that a Crystal Tech Achievement Award slid out of his cardboard box and shattered against the polished concrete floor. At the exact same moment, a notification popped up on his screen from his private bank. "Account status alert. Primary personal and business accounts frozen due to ongoing institutional restructuring and debt acceleration." Every single domino he had meticulously set up, the $500 million valuation, the elite high society connections, the absolute corporate standing had fallen in a matter of hours. The very legal and financial systems he had used to crush Diana had turned their massive, cold gears and crushed him instead. He was no longer a tech king looking down on the world. He was just a man standing in a lobby, holding a box of paper trash, with the cold wind rushing in every time the glass doors slid open. The wind outside the Hudson Street corporate headquarters was relentless, sweeping through the concrete canyons of Manhattan and carrying with it the bitter chill of a sudden winter storm. On the concrete sidewalk, a scene was unfolding that drew the immediate, hushed stares of hurried analysts, tech developers, and onlookers. Evelyn stood huddled near the revolving glass entrance, her expensive mink coat offering absolutely no protection against the biting cold. Her face, usually a mask of aristocratic perfection and unyielding snobbery, was flushed with a mixture of panic and deep, raw humiliation. When the heavy security doors opened and Diana stepped out, flanked by Marcus Vance and her newly appointed corporate security detail, Evelyn rushed forward, completely abandoning every shred of the high society dignity she had spent a lifetime cultivating. "Diana, please stop," Evelyn cried out, her voice cracking as she reached out a gloved hand, only to be politely but firmly blocked by Anna's lead security guard. "You have to listen to me. This has gone too far. Victor is completely ruined. They are repossessing the penthouse. His name is permanently blacklisted across the entire venture capital network, and the clearing banks are calling in every single personal loan. You loved him once, Diana. You can't do this to him. You can't do this to our family." Diana stopped. She turned slowly, her expression completely unreadable behind her dark designer sunglasses. She looked down at Evelyn, whose eyes were wide with desperation, tears threatening to ruin her meticulously applied makeup. "Your family, Evelyn?" Diana asked, her voice calm, slicing through the howling wind like a razor. "A week ago, you sat across from me at Le Bernardin and told me I lacked the caliber to even represent Victor's status. You stood by and cheered while your son tried to throw me out of our own home with nothing but a $50,000 check and a lifetime of supportive silence you called a financial dead weight. Where was your sense of family then?" "We were wrong," Evelyn pleaded, her hands trembling violently as she looked past Diana toward Marcus Vance, hoping for a shred of legal leniency or pity. "We didn't know. We didn't understand your true capacity. If you just drop the immediate margin acceleration clause, we can settle this quietly. We can fix this, Diana. We can restructure the equity." "You still don't get it," Diana said softly, stepping closer so only Evelyn could hear her next words over the roar of the city traffic. "You're not sorry you treated me like an outsider, Evelyn. You're just sorry you got caught. You only value me now because you finally know what my vault is worth on a corporate balance sheet. That isn't respect. That's just survival." From behind them, Victor approached the curb, his cardboard box of personal belongings tucked awkwardly under his arm. He looked completely hollowed out, his posture slouched, staring helplessly at the woman he had completely underestimated for 5 long years. He opened his mouth to speak, to beg, to offer an apology he had never intended to give until his entire stolen empire crumbled into absolute dust. But Diana didn't give him the chance. She didn't look back at him. She looked down at the street, where her personal vehicle sat idling near the rear bumper of a waiting, midnight black town car. Her assistant stepped forward, opening the passenger door for her. "Keep the settlement money, Victor," Diana said, turning her back on them as she prepared to step inside the warm luxury of the car. "Consider it my relocation allowance for you and your mother. You have 24 hours to leave my infrastructure." Diana stepped into the vehicle. The door closed with a solid, heavy thud, sealing out the noise and the cold of the city. As the town car pulled away from the curb and merged into the afternoon traffic, Victor and Evelyn were left standing on the freezing pavement, completely ignored by the passing crowds, left with nothing but the